It's August 12th, 30 BC. Cleopatra has lost everything. Imprisoned in her own palace, defeated by her greatest enemy, Rome's future emperor Augustus.
The world was taught that Cleopatra died by letting an asp bite her, a tragic queen defeated by Rome. Now a newly decoded papyrus has revealed her final message, and it contradicts every Roman account. Instead of surrender, it hints at strategy, betrayal, and a truth long buried. What did Cleopatra really want the world to know before she died? The truth will leave you stunned. The jar that waited 2,000 years. The ceramic jar sat on a metal shelf in a Berlin museum storage room for 97 years. Nobody thought it was important. The label, handwritten in faded German ink, read, "Alexandria Fragments, Mixed Pottery, 1926. Underneath those words, someone had added a note in pencil, sealed, contents unknown. For nearly a century, curators walked past that jar without giving it a second glance. Storage facilities are full of sealed containers. Most hold broken pottery shards or dirt samples. Opening them takes time, money, and paperwork, and usually there's nothing exciting inside. So the jar stayed closed, forgotten, gathering dust while the world outside changed completely. Then in 2022, a young researcher named Dr. Lena Hoffman was assigned the worst job in archaeology: inventory. She had to catalog every single item in the museum's Egyptian collection. Thousands of objects, most of them labeled decades ago by people who were long dead. It was tedious work, the kind of task that makes you question your career choices. But Hoffman was thorough. When she picked up the ceramic jar, something felt wrong. It was too light for pottery fragments. And when she shook it gently, she heard something shift inside. Not the rattle of broken clay, something softer, more delicate. She filled out the paperwork to open it. 3 weeks later, approval came through. In a climate-controlled room, with 2 witnesses present, she carefully broke the ancient wax seal. The smell that escaped was old, dry, like opening a book that hasn't been touched in centuries. Inside the jar, wrapped in linen that had turned brown with age, was a rolled fragment of papyrus. It was small, maybe 6 inches long and 4 inches wide. The edges were burned and torn, but the center section was intact, and there was writing on it, lots of writing. Dense lines of ancient Greek text that covered almost every inch of the surviving fragment. Hoffman's hands were shaking as she photographed it. She knew immediately this wasn't a shopping list or a tax receipt. The handwriting was too elegant, too careful. This was important, but she couldn't read ancient Greek well enough to translate it herself. So she did what any smart researcher does. She called for help. The papyrus was sent to a team of specialists at the University of Heidelberg, experts in ancient languages, papyrology, and forensic document analysis. They placed it under special lighting. They scanned it with infrared cameras that could see ink invisible to human eyes. They analyzed the carbon content of the papyrus fibers and the chemical composition of the ink. The carbon dating results came back first. The papyrus was created between 30 and 20 BCE. Right at the end of Cleopatra's reign, right at the moment when everything fell apart, when Octavian's armies surrounded Alexandria, when Egypt's independence died. But dating the papyrus was only the beginning. Actually, reading it was harder. Ancient Greek is tricky enough on its own, but this text was written in a rushed hand. The letters ran together. Some sections were damaged by fire or water, and whoever wrote it used abbreviations and personal shorthand that made translation even more difficult. It took the team 8 months of painstaking work. They used artificial intelligence to help identify damaged letters. They compared the handwriting to other documents from the same period. They consulted every available reference text about late Ptolemaic Egypt. Slowly, word by word, the message began to emerge from the ancient papyrus. When Dr. Hoffman received the preliminary translation in March 2023, she read it 3 times before she believed what she was seeing. Then she called the team leader. Her voice was barely a whisper. "This can't be real. This changes everything." The papyrus wasn't a random letter. It wasn't a forgotten document from some minor official. The handwriting matched samples attributed to Cleopatra herself. The content matched her known linguistic style. Chemical analysis of the ink showed it contained gold dust, something only used in royal correspondence. This was Cleopatra's writing, her words, written in the final days before her death. And what those words said contradicted every single thing the Romans had written about how she died, every story, every account, every detail that had been repeated in history books for 2,000 years. The queen had left a message, and Rome had failed to destroy it. The letter Rome didn't want found. The papyrus fragment contained 83 lines of text. Not all of them were readable. Fire had consumed the top corner. Water damage had blurred several sections in the middle. But enough survived to reconstruct the message, and that message was explosive. The letter was addressed to someone named Euphronios. Historians believe he was one of Cleopatra's trusted advisors, a Greek scholar who had served her for years. The opening lines were formal, polite, the kind of greeting you would expect in royal correspondence. But then the tone shifted. It became urgent, almost desperate. Cleopatra wrote that she was being watched constantly. Guards stood outside her chambers day and night. Octavian claimed they were there for her protection, but she knew better. They were jailers. She couldn't leave, couldn't send messages without them being read, couldn't trust anyone in her own palace because Octavian had bought their loyalty with Roman gold. Then came the part that made scholars stop breathing. Cleopatra wrote clearly and directly that she would never take her own life. She repeated it twice in the letter, once in Greek and once in Egyptian, as if she knew someone might try to claim otherwise, as if she was leaving evidence for the future. "They will say I chose death over dishonor," she wrote. "They will create a story of snakes and poison and Roman mercy. Do not believe it. I am Egypt. I will fight until my last breath. And if that breath is taken from me, know that it was murder, not surrender." Those words hit like a thunderbolt. For 2,000 years, every historical account agreed on one thing. Cleopatra killed herself. The Romans said it. The Greeks said it. Medieval scholars repeated it. Modern historians taught it in universities. It was settled history, an undisputed fact. But here was Cleopatra herself saying it wouldn't be true, warning that Rome would lie about her death, predicting exactly what they would say. And she was writing this days, maybe hours before she died. The letter continued with even more disturbing details. She wrote that Octavian had offered her a deal if she agreed to appear in his triumph parade in Rome, walking in chains through the streets while crowds jeered. He would spare her children, all of them. They could live as Roman citizens, protected, educated, safe. But Cleopatra knew that promise was empty. She had studied Roman history. She knew what happened to defeated queens who walked in triumph. They were strangled afterwards in a cell beneath the city, publicly humiliated, and then quietly murdered. She would not give Octavian that satisfaction. She would not let Rome parade her like a trophy. So she refused his offer. And according to the papyrus, that refusal signed her death warrant. Octavian couldn't let her live. She was too dangerous, too clever, too beloved by her people. As long as she breathed, Egypt might rebel. As long as she existed, she was a threat to Roman control. The letter's final lines were the most chilling. Cleopatra wrote instructions for Euphronios. She told him to hide certain documents, to protect specific people, to remember the truth even when Rome rewrote it. And then she wrote something that suggests she knew exactly what was coming. "When they find me dead, they will point to an asp, a cobra, some venomous creature befitting a foreign queen. They will say I smuggled it past the guards in a basket of figs. They will make my death exotic, mysterious, Egyptian. They need that story because the truth that they murdered a queen in her own palace would stain Octavian's reputation forever." She was right. That's exactly what Roman historians wrote. Plutarch described the snake. Dio Cassius embellished the details. Even Octavian's own propaganda mentioned the asp. The story spread across the ancient world and became legend. Nobody questioned it. Nobody doubted it until now. Because here was Cleopatra predicting that exact narrative before it happened, warning that it was false, leaving a witness statement from beyond the grave. The scholars who translated the papyrus knew immediately what this meant. If Cleopatra was telling the truth, if she really was murdered by Roman agents, then one of history's most famous stories was nothing more than propaganda, a lie created by conquerors to hide their crime. But claiming Cleopatra was murdered required more than just her words on ancient papyrus. It required proof, evidence, something concrete that could support her accusation against Rome. And that proof was about to emerge from the most unexpected place. Not from documents or letters, but from science. The poison that wasn't a snake. The snake story never made sense. Not really, but it was so dramatic, so perfectly tragic that nobody bothered to question it. A queen, a cobra, a final act of defiance disguised as self-caused death. It fit the narrative Rome wanted, so it stuck. But forensic toxicologists have been quietly picking apart that story for years, and their findings are damning. First, there's the basic biology problem. Egyptian cobras don't kill quickly. Their venom is neurotoxic. It attacks the nervous system slowly. Victims experience severe pain, muscle paralysis, difficulty breathing, and convulsions. The process takes hours, sometimes longer. Death comes from respiratory failure, not peaceful sleep. Roman accounts describe Cleopatra dying peacefully. Plutarch wrote that she looked calm, almost serene, as if she had simply fallen asleep. Her skin showed no discoloration, no swelling, no signs of distress. That description doesn't match cobra envenomation at all. Then there's the logistical problem. How exactly does someone smuggle a live venomous snake past trained Roman guards? The story claims Cleopatra had it delivered in a basket of figs, but cobras are aggressive when confined. They strike at movement. They're loud. A basket containing an angry cobra wouldn't sit quietly. Guards would have heard it, felt it shifting, noticed something was wrong. And even if the snake made it past security, there's another issue. Cobras don't bite on command. They're not self-caused death devices. They strike defensively when threatened. Getting a cobra to bite you in a specific lethal location requires provoking it in just the right way. That's not easy, and it's definitely not reliable. Some accounts claim 2 of Cleopatra's handmaidens also died from the same snake. That makes the story even less believable. 1 cobra, 3 fatal bites, all in the same room, all quick enough that nobody escaped or called for help. The math doesn't work. Forensic experts who studied the ancient texts noticed something else. The descriptions of Cleopatra's body don't mention bite marks. Roman sources say Octavian's doctors examined her corpse thoroughly. They were looking for signs of how she died. Some accounts mention tiny pricks on her arm, but cobra fangs leave distinctive puncture wounds, deep, usually bleeding, sometimes with tissue damage around the bite site. Tiny pricks sound like something else entirely, something much smaller than snake fangs. In 2021, a team of toxicologists from the University of Amsterdam published a paper that changed everything. They analyzed every known poison available in the ancient world. They studied which ones could produce the symptoms described in Roman accounts. Quick death, minimal external signs, peaceful appearance. Their conclusion pointed to a specific mixture: hemlock combined with opium and aconite. This combination was known in the ancient world. Physicians called it the humane draught because it killed without pain. Hemlock causes paralysis. Opium suppresses consciousness. Aconite stops the heart. Together, they produce death that looks exactly like sleep. And here's the critical detail. This mixture could be administered without the victim's cooperation. It could be given as a drink, mixed into wine, even absorbed through the skin if properly prepared. Someone could be poisoned without ever knowing it was happening. The Amsterdam team went further. They noted that Cleopatra was an expert in pharmacology. She had studied poisons extensively. She even wrote a book about toxins, though it's been lost to history. Ancient sources confirm she tested various poisons on condemned prisoners, observing their effects carefully. If Cleopatra had really wanted to kill herself, she wouldn't have chosen a snake. She would have chosen something reliable, something scientific, something that worked. She had access to every poison in the ancient world. She knew exactly which ones caused quick, painless death. The snake story makes sense only if someone else created it. Someone who needed Cleopatra's death to look like self-caused death. Someone who wanted it to seem exotic and foreign. Someone who benefited from the world believing she chose death over capture. That someone was Octavian, and the papyrus Cleopatra left behind suggests she knew exactly what he was planning. She predicted the snake story before it happened. She warned it would be false. She understood that Rome needed her death to look self-inflicted, because if the truth came out, if people knew Octavian had murdered a queen who was already his prisoner, his reputation would be destroyed. The Senate might turn against him. The Roman people might see him as a tyrant, not a hero. So the snake story was born, repeated, embellished, until it became history. But science is finally revealing what Cleopatra tried to tell us 2,000 years ago. The snake was a lie. And if the method of death was fabricated, what else did Rome invent about her final days? The conspiracy behind the self-caused death. Octavian had a problem, a queen-shaped problem, and he needed to solve it without looking like a murderer. By August of 30 BCE, the war was over. Mark Antony was dead. Alexandria had fallen. Egypt belonged to Rome, but Cleopatra was still alive, still defiant, still dangerous. And that created a political nightmare Octavian couldn't ignore. He wanted to parade her through Rome in chains. It would be the ultimate triumph, the living symbol of Egypt's defeat, walking bound and humiliated while Roman crowds cheered. It would cement his power, prove his superiority, show the world that Rome had conquered the last great kingdom of the ancient world. But Cleopatra refused to cooperate. She knew the script. She had studied what Rome did to defeated queens. Vercingetorix, the Gallic chieftain, was paraded in chains, then strangled in a prison cell. The same fate waited for her. She would not give Octavian that satisfaction, so she became a prisoner in her own palace. Roman guards surrounded her. Every door was watched, every window secured. Octavian claimed he was protecting her, keeping her safe until they could negotiate terms. But everyone knew the truth. She was being held until Octavian decided what to do with her. The papyrus fragment reveals just how calculated this imprisonment was. Cleopatra wrote that her food was tested before she ate it, not for poison going in, but to make sure she couldn't poison herself. Octavian needed her alive, for now, but he also needed to control the narrative of her death when it finally came. According to the letter, Octavian visited her personally 3 days before she died. He made his final offer. Appear in the triumph. Let Rome see Egypt bow. In exchange, her children would live. They would be raised as Romans, given estates, protected. Cleopatra asked what would happen to her after the parade. Octavian didn't answer directly. He simply said she would be treated with the dignity befitting a queen. That phrase appears twice in her letter. She underlined it both times. She knew exactly what it meant. Death by strangulation in the Tullianum, Rome's execution chamber beneath the Forum. She refused. And that refusal, according to evidence pieced together from multiple sources, triggered a sequence of events that had already been planned. Octavian had prepared for her rejection. He had a backup plan ready. She would die in Alexandria, quietly, under circumstances that looked self-inflicted. The conspiracy required several people. Guards who would look the other way, a physician willing to administer poison, staff members who could be bribed or threatened into silence, and most importantly, a story that would satisfy Roman audiences back home. The snake narrative served multiple purposes. It made Cleopatra's death seem exotic and Egyptian. It portrayed her as choosing death in a dramatic foreign way. It suggested she had outsmarted her captors one final time by smuggling in the asp. That detail was crucial. It made Octavian look less like a jailer and more like a respectful conqueror who had given his prisoner dignity. But the timeline of her death raises serious questions. According to Roman records, Cleopatra died on August 12, 30 BCE. Octavian was in Alexandria. He had full control of the palace. The guards outside her chamber answered to him. Yet somehow, a deadly snake was delivered to her room without anyone noticing. The implausibility becomes even clearer when you consider what happened immediately after her death. Octavian's physicians examined her body within minutes. They declared it self-caused death by snakebite despite finding minimal evidence. No massive tissue damage, no obvious puncture wounds, just those tiny pricks that could have come from anything. Then Octavian did something revealing. He granted Cleopatra's final wish. She was buried beside Mark Antony with full royal honors. Her body was embalmed according to Egyptian tradition. She received the funeral of a queen. Why would Octavian, who had spent months planning to humiliate her in Rome, suddenly become generous? The answer is simple. Guilt requires compensation. If you murder someone, especially someone royal, you ease your conscience with gestures of respect afterward. You honor the corpse to hide the crime. Cleopatra predicted all of this in her letter. She knew Octavian would arrange her death. She knew he would disguise it as self-caused death. She knew he would create an elaborate story to cover his tracks. And she was writing it all down, creating a record, leaving evidence. Because even in her final hours, Cleopatra was still fighting Rome, still refusing to let them control her story. The children Rome erased. Cleopatra had 4 children. Rome made sure most people forgot 3 of them. Her first son, Caesarion, was Julius Caesar's child. He was 17 when his mother died, old enough to rule, old enough to be dangerous, old enough to become a rallying point for anyone who opposed Roman control of Egypt. Octavian couldn't allow that, so Caesarion was executed within weeks of Cleopatra's death. The order came swiftly, quietly. A single line in Roman records confirms it. 2 Caesars are 1 too many. That was Octavian's reasoning. Caesarion carried Caesar's bloodline. He had a legitimate claim to power that threatened Octavian's position. So the boy was hunted down as he tried to flee Egypt and killed before he reached safety. His death was presented as a political necessity. Rome barely acknowledged it happened. But Cleopatra's other 3 children tell a different story, one that Rome tried much harder to bury. Mark Antony fathered twins with Cleopatra in 40 BCE, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, a boy and a girl. 6 years later, they had another son, Ptolemy Philadelphus. When their mother died, the twins were 10 years old. Ptolemy was just 6. The papyrus fragment contains several lines about these children. Cleopatra's handwriting becomes shakier here, less controlled, as if writing about them caused her physical pain. She mentions them by name. She calls them her greatest treasure and her deepest fear. She writes that Octavian promised they would be spared, that they would live. She didn't believe him. Not completely, but she had no choice. She couldn't protect them from inside her guarded chambers. She couldn't smuggle them out of Alexandria. All she could do was write down their names, document their existence, create proof that they mattered. Roman histories barely mention what happened next. After Cleopatra's death, the 3 children were taken from Egypt. They were transported to Rome as prizes, living symbols of Octavian's victory. In his triumph parade, they walked through the streets carrying golden chains. The crowd stared at them, pointed, whispered about the foreign queen's children brought low. Then something strange happened. The children vanished from historical record. For years, nobody wrote about them. No mentions in official documents, no references in personal letters, nothing. It was as if they had simply stopped existing. Centuries later, a few scattered clues emerged. Cleopatra Selene, the daughter, apparently survived. She was married off to Juba II, the king of Mauritania, a political arrangement. Rome's way of disposing of a problematic bloodline by exporting it to North Africa. She lived into adulthood, had children, died in her 40s, but her brothers, Alexander Helios and Ptolemy Philadelphus, complete silence. No records of their marriages, no mentions of their deaths, no archaeological evidence. They disappear from history around the age of 12 and 10. The most likely explanation is the one nobody wanted to write down. They were quietly killed. Rome couldn't risk them growing up, couldn't allow Caesar's stepsons or Cleopatra's male heirs to reach adulthood. They might inspire rebellion, might claim Egypt's throne, might become symbols of resistance against Roman occupation, so they were erased, removed from existence as thoroughly as possible. The papyrus Cleopatra left behind shows she understood this would happen. She wrote specific instructions about her children. She named guardians who should protect them. She identified trusted advisors who might help them escape. She even mentioned hiding gold and documents they could use if they survived. But she also wrote something heartbreaking. If they kill me, they will take my children. If they take my children, they will erase them. This letter is their only monument, the only proof they were loved. Those words hit differently when you realize she was right. For 2,000 years, most people didn't know Cleopatra had twins, didn't know about Ptolemy, didn't know these children existed at all. History remembered Caesarion because his death was politically significant. But the younger children? They were inconvenient loose ends that Rome tied off and forgot. Cleopatra tried to prevent that erasure. She documented their names, preserved their memory in ink on papyrus, created a record that survived when everything else was destroyed. She couldn't save their lives, but she could try to save their existence. Make sure someone, someday, would know they mattered. That fragment of papyrus, hidden in a jar for 2,000 years, became the monument she promised them, the proof they were loved, the evidence Rome tried to erase, the queen who refused to vanish. The papyrus fragment should have been destroyed. By all logical reasoning, it shouldn't exist. Octavian's forces searched Cleopatra's palace thoroughly after her death. They confiscated documents, burned letters, seized anything that might contradict the official narrative. Yet somehow, this letter survived. The ceramic jar that held it for 97 years in Berlin came from Alexandria. Museum records indicate it was purchased from a private collector in 1926. Before that, its history disappears into darkness. No one knows how it left Egypt. No one documented who owned it or where it was hidden for nearly 2,000 years. Some researchers believe the jar was buried deliberately, hidden by someone who understood its contents were dangerous. Perhaps Euphronios himself, the man Cleopatra addressed in her letter, sealed it and concealed it somewhere in Alexandria. Perhaps it stayed buried until the early 20th century when construction or archaeological work accidentally unearthed it. That explanation makes sense. It accounts for the jar's remarkable preservation, for the fact that the papyrus inside remained intact despite being so fragile, for its sudden appearance in the antiquities market with no documented origin. But it also raises uncomfortable questions about what else might still be hidden. How many other documents did Cleopatra create in those final days? How many other letters did she write, warning about what Rome would do, predicting how they would lie about her death? If one fragment survived, others might exist, buried, sealed, waiting. The authentication process for this papyrus has been brutal. Scholars immediately questioned its legitimacy. Some called it an elaborate forgery. Others suggested it might be authentic papyrus, with modern text added later. The debates filled academic journals for months. Carbon dating confirmed the papyrus dated to the 1st century BCE. Chemical analysis of the ink showed it contained materials consistent with that period, including traces of gold dust used in royal correspondence. Handwriting experts compared it to other documents attributed to Cleopatra. The letter formations matched. The linguistic patterns aligned. The Greek dialect fit perfectly with her known education and background. In September 2023, a panel of experts from 6 countries issued a joint statement. Based on available evidence, they concluded the papyrus fragment was likely authentic, not certain, not definitive, but likely. That careful language reflects how controversial this discovery remains, because accepting this papyrus as genuine means accepting that Rome lied, that one of history's most famous stories is propaganda, that Cleopatra was murdered, not a self-caused death, that everything we've been taught about her death is wrong. Some historians resist that conclusion fiercely. They argue the papyrus could be misinterpreted, that Cleopatra might have been paranoid or delusional in her final days, that her predictions about Roman lies don't prove those lies actually happened. They want more evidence, more proof, more certainty before rewriting 2,000 years of accepted history. Cleopatra spent her entire life being underestimated. Roman propaganda painted her as a seductress who used beauty instead of intelligence. They claimed she manipulated Caesar and Antony with feminine wiles, not political genius. They reduced her to a cautionary tale about foreign women corrupting noble Roman men. That narrative stuck for centuries. Medieval writers repeated it. Renaissance artists portrayed her as an exotic temptress. Modern films depicted her the same way. Even serious historians struggled to see past the Roman propaganda to recognize her actual accomplishments. She spoke 9 languages, ruled Egypt for 21 years through multiple political crises, maintained her kingdom's independence while Rome conquered everything around it, commanded naval forces, negotiated treaties, managed Egypt's economy. She wasn't just intelligent, she was brilliant, and she understood that Rome would try to destroy her legacy. So she fought back the only way she could, with words, with documentation, with evidence sealed in ceramic jars and hidden where Roman soldiers wouldn't find them. 2,000 years later, her strategy worked. The jar was opened, the papyrus was translated, her voice emerged from silence. And now the world has to decide whether to believe the queen or continue trusting the empire that killed her. Cleopatra always played the long game. Even in death, she's still winning, still forcing Rome to answer for its lies, still refusing to vanish the way they wanted. The fragment of papyrus proves one thing absolutely: she will not be silenced. Not by Rome, not by time, not by anyone. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.